And all appearances look like our meetings for the rest of you are going to be online too. I'd rather be face to face with everyone. I'm sure you'd rather sit around and talk to people too. I don't know about you, when I've gotten to the point somebody asked me a question about beekeeping, I just talk their ear off because I want to talk about beekeeping. So I warned people in advance if they ask you a question, says you better be prepared for a 2-hour conversation. So I have a feeling some of you are probably feeling the same way. Little bit of business need to take care of right first. If you have anybody that's interested in being a scholarship student, we need to get that application in. The application's online on our website. So if you have somebody that you think would be interested, have them get on our site and fill out the application. In October, or normally when we nominate officers for the organization, or as of right now, we have the treasurer, he wants to step down, and the third vice president, Marjorie, she has editor of the newsletter, she wants to step down. So we've got treasurer and newsletter positions open. So if you're interested, if you want to take my place, more than happy to. I'll be glad to step down. I'm getting tired of looking at my face probably after 3 years. But if you do have something, that's coming in February or October meeting. And just to look ahead, we had a board meeting a little while ago where we do plan on having our class next spring. We're reserving the space. We hope that by then we'll be able to have in-person classes, or at least arrange some method of having a class for it. So you have people that you know are interested in beekeeping. We're still planning on having a class. That's pretty much all I have. We get ready to turn this over to Eric, introduce our speaker. If you've never heard Grant before, you're in for a very good presentation. I've been looking forward to this ever since I found out who's going to be here. So unless somebody else has something else they need to pipe up about, let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to just turn it over to Eric and get me off the screen.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Everybody hear me okay? I completely agree. Everybody's in for a treat. If you don't know who Grant Gillard is, I think if we wanted to do his experience justice, it'd take another hour's presentation. Some highlights. Grant is a highly decorated reverend and beekeeper. If you go to Amazon Prime and search his name, you will find 31 books published under Grant's name. Not all of them are about beekeeping, and it looks like not all of them he wrote. It looks like some of them were written with others. But Grant was the president of the Missouri Beekeepers Association back between, I think, 2009 and 11, and he's been a pastor for I think his career, all of his career, and also a beekeeper and an extremely knowledgeable and informative beekeeper. And we're lucky to have him speaking with us today on fall preparation. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Grant. So Grant, if you want to unmute yourself, I will spotlight your video, and you're welcome to take it away.
Can I get my screen sharing?
Go ahead and scroll down there to screen share, share screen at the bottom.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, dang. Okay, well, technical difficulties, folks. Let me figure out how to do that. All participants. Okay. Who can start sharing with someone? Okay, try now.
Yep, there we go. Oops, let's see how.
Beautiful, we got it.
Yep. And see if I can figure out how to work this. Yeah, hang on just there. There we go. I am a little technology challenged. When you take a look at this, I just call it Midwestern Beekeepers for the meeting today. When it's got slideshare.net, I put this PowerPoint up on SlideShare. As long as you're going to record this, that's great. But I also got it up on SlideShare because there's a couple of recipes I got going on here. So. No, hang on. Well, let's see. Why won't my slides advance here?
While we're waiting, I forgot to mention that that picture just reminded me, Grant, that Grant also runs a farmer's market in Lee Summit. Grant, how much longer does that farmer's market go?
To the end of October.
So if y'all want to meet or go shopping or promote Gillard honey, you can see on the screen there that you can see them. What days of the week do you guys meet there?
We're downtown Lee Summit on Saturdays, Wednesdays. And then at the Abundant Life Baptist Church on Saturday mornings, both 8 to noon. So Wednesdays downtown Lee Summit, 2nd and Douglas at the O Spot, and then the other one is at the Abundant Life Baptist Church on Purcell's. I think I got this thing figured out.
Awesome.
But I like to show this picture just because I want everybody to know this is kind of why I'm into beekeeping, and this is the context that a lot of my stuff I work with do. And I was to remind people, I moved up here to Holden from the Cape Girardeau area, and there's still some people who don't know I moved. So I get these calls and people say, hey, can you come on speak to our group in Cape Girardeau? I said, well, yeah, if you want to pay mileage from Kansas City, I'm game for that. And I'm also kind of pastor. I was very, very part-time at this little church in Odessa called New Horizons. It's mostly a Sunday morning gig, but they needed a pastor and I was free and they can't pay very much. So I'm glad I got my bees and retirement. A lot of stuff we're talking about today comes out of this book. This is Backyard Beekeeping #3. This will also be, you find it on Amazon, but there's just a lot of stuff in here, presuming really most of our bees are 2nd-year hives if they survive the winter. And of course, if they don't survive the winter, one of the questions to ask is, how come? What went wrong? What can we do differently? And then of course, how can you take like live hives, split them into filling out the dead outs? And that's all in this book that's up on Amazon. And here's just a little something I like to say. It's like advice on advice. And really just advice is just an opinion. And it's based on experience. Now, if someone came to me and said, what's your opinion on strawberry rhubarb pie? I'd have to say, don't do that to strawberries. That's the worst thing you can do to a strawberry. My experience has been with my grandmother, who I think was always just a little too cheap and a little too skimpy on the sugar. And so her strawberry rhubarb pies, based on my experience, were very tart and sour. So from that perspective, that's my experience. Ask me something about queen rearing, I've got some experience, I have an opinion. Ask me experience about overwintering colonies, I have that experience, and so I have an opinion. And advice will vary because opinions vary, and everybody's experience is just a little different. And what a lot of beginners will tell me is, well, I just want to know the right way to keep bees. Well, is there a right way? Yeah, the way that suits you. It's going to be different than the way that suits me. So from that perspective, everybody's got to find that little niche. And instead of arguing, which is what we like to do on social media, when someone says, I got a question about this, nobody answers the question. Everybody starts arguing with one another because the other person is wrong. Well, it's just what works for you. And if you're keeping bees to make honey, you're going to have one way to do it. If you're raising bees just to have hives in the backyard, well, you're going to have a different way to do that too. And everybody's got to find that little niche. And we've all got experience. So that's what forms our opinions. And my opinion might be right, might be wrong, depends on where you're at. But I've been learning some relevant observations, especially this summer for some reason. I've had some hives. I mean, they just fail to thrive and survive. And then for some reason, I don't know, I requeen them. I bring all over frames from another colony, try and bolster them. And a lot of times it just seems like a hive is destined to fail. Put a lot of time and energy into it, and a lot of times it's just kind of a wasted time. So sometimes I just leave them alone, they'll self-correct. But mostly I'm just looking at putting in my time and energy into hives that show a lot of promise and potential. And I've run across a new trend, first on the internet, and then some lady spoke about this at a meeting on Thursday at Centerview about freezing supers prior to extracting. I thought, well, this is just crazy. But again, that's just my opinion because I've never tried it. I do know if you're going to freeze them, well, they got to be thawed out prior to extracting. And so I asked her, why do you freeze these supers before you extract them? And she said, to kill off the bugs and pathogens. Well, once you extract the honey is okay. You could freeze then the extracted frames, but I just thought this was an extra step that wasn't necessary. But I've been running across this on social media, and I'm not sure who started this idea, but it's just nothing I think that's important. But again, that's just my opinion. I want to tell you about something I did interesting this spring. I decided I'd plant some sunflowers. So I got a rototiller and I tilled up about a ½ acre. And about this point, I'm thinking that's probably enough right there. But I kept at it, and later, it got to be quite a little bit of chore. Planted the sunflowers, and man, you talk about the bees, the pollinators, all these wasps, they were just all over that bunch of sunflowers. And really, I just bought some bird seed. I had some other sunflower seed, and you can see in the background there's some taller ones, there's some shorter ones, and it was great fun. And the bees they just tore them up. They had a great time with those. And it's just something to kind of play around with a little bit and experiment. This is a purple bean vine, and that grew from one bean that somebody had planted in a styrofoam cup and gave it to my wife. And we thought, well, let's just put it back here on the back side of the house and let it kind of crawl up on the deck. Well, it crawled up on the deck all right. And my dog liked to watch the bees. The bees didn't exactly tear it up, but they were interested in it enough. And mostly later in the afternoon and evening, hummingbirds really liked it as well. And I found a lot of uncapped frames this year. And people say, well, what do you do with them? Well, the kind of the beginner logic is, well, don't extract a frame unless it's totally capped. Well, I got a refractometer, and so I tested the capped portion, and it came back at 15%. That's really, really low. That's a real thick, viscous honey. So I thought, well, what's the uncapped look like? 16.5. And we like to think 18% is a good breakdown. So that frame got extracted. But man, I've been dealing with these cappings, and this is the biggest bottleneck. So what am I going to do with them? I decided I'd build myself a solar collector, which is kind of odd because after all the years I've been keeping bees, I've never built one of these. So I had some pans, these pans from the buffet tables, the steam tables at the buffet, and had a bunch of those I picked up somewhere. And so I built little boxes that sit over them. And then I lined those boxes with paper towels and then let the sunshine warm them up. And they warmed them up pretty good. And you can see down there in the lower right-hand corner, the bees could smell that melting wax. And they found ways to get in, but they couldn't find ways to get out. And then this is what those pans look like underneath. And you put some water in there so you can get the wax out. But still, I think this is the best way to deal with cappings. I got the roasting pan on the right, put all my cappings in there, I let them melt down, and then I move them to the left. That's also a roasting pan. And I've got a colander in there. Looks like that, just something you pick up at Walmart. I line that with a paper towel, and because I keep it in the roasting pan, it stays warm. So I got my cappings there. I've got my melted cappings. They drip through that paper towel. And then I pour them in these little, they look like margarine tubs. They're actually little deli trays. So I can extract a little disc like that. And then I've been turning them into wax candles at the farmer's market. This is just another product to sell, and it also attracts a lot of attention just because people are, sometimes they look through the honey and go, nah, honey's honey. But then they come these beeswax candles. And I've been trying to get beeswax candles to burn efficiently. And finally I found a little secret that I think is a secret, is these organic hemp wicks. And that, they burn so much more efficiently, but an organic hemp wick doesn't break down like a cotton wick. So it's got to be trimmed rather routinely. As I move into fall, this is how I like to take care of my supers after they're extracted. It's called Zen Terry. There's another, when you look at the American Bee Journal, there's another company that has picked up the same product. Basically, it's this Bacillus thuringius, if that's how you pronounce it. BT, it's been around forever. It's a biological insecticide specifically for certain caterpillars, and this is for the wax moth. And so I like to spray my supers down, the frames down. It's labor intensive, but I like this better than I like the parodichlorobenzene. But if I get into a jam and have a lot of these to take care of, well, I'll use parodichlorobenzene. But I like this stuff. And then in terms of winter preparations, you know, here we are 3/4 of the way through September. I really like to get my fall management started about August the 1st. In the ideal world, of course that really doesn't exist, but in the ideal world, I like to get harvesting and the extracting wrapped up by the 1st of August. There's been some people on the Missouri State Beekeeping Facebook pages asking about splitting, and they're first and second year beekeepers, but splitting after harvesting. In my mind, this is not the time to be thinking about splitting. And particularly what they talk about is just splitting and then letting the unqueened half raise their own queen. Well, that takes 3 to 4 weeks. Now you're about September the 1st. Can you get them built up before it really gets cold? Now, sometimes I think that's just pushing your luck. I've tried this. I've tried splitting around the 1st of August, and I really think July 1st is about the last I like to do it. But moving into winter preparations, I've got 3 goals. Really, I want a strong population, at minimum 6 to 8 frames of brood. I'm looking at starting my, whatever I want to do for my mite management. And I use that description rather generically, mite management, because some people like to treat, some people like to manage them for other things in terms of like integrated pest management. Some people have no qualms about what treatments to use, and then there's a host of other treatments to use, but that also have enough ample stores for the winter. So in terms of the strong population, August the 1st, get my supers off. I feed like a 1-to-1 to stimulate the queen to lay eggs. Sometimes I'll supplement with Honeybee Healthy, but that's sometimes just a recipe for robbing. And then I like to make what I call a stimulus protein patty. And I call it a protein patty. I don't want to call it a pollen substitute, because when you really get down to it, there's no substitute for pollen. So I like to feed this stimulus, and here's what the recipe looks like. I start with a 4-pound bag of sugar. I add 4 cups of protein, and there's all kinds of good stuff on the market. I just happen to like AP23 from Daydent, but Man Lake's got a good product. There's just other options on it. But then a cup of liquid cooking oil. And sometimes I use canola, and some people like to use olive oil, and then just a 32-ounce bottle of light corn syrup. Now you have to mix that in a bucket with a drill, because that gets really stiff and it's really, really, really sticky. And this is what I like to use to mix it up. And you can see the handle on that drill is rather messy, because this is kind of a messy process. And then in midsummer, after I fed this stimulus patty and I fed them 1-to-1, by mid-September, I'm ready to stop feeding. Hopefully I've gotten them all heavy enough. But if I still got some weak colonies, it's better to put a weak colony in with a strong colony as opposed to trying to join two weak colonies together. And I don't think this is any big secret, but the logic goes along the lines of if you got two weak colonies, there's a reason those two are weak. And a stronger colony can probably use the resources that the weak colony is just going to waste dying out. The other option is to pull frames of honey and brood from a strong colony and give it to the weak. But again, sometimes you got to start looking at, what am I taking away from a good colony? Am I endangering that survival? And am I really going to help a weak colony that may have some other underlying issue of why it's weak? In terms of mite management, I tell you, the earlier the better. And once the supers come off, I like to start treating. Now, it's August, it's hot. So what do I treat with? Well, let me throw this little column in, this little graph here. You see down July, the mite population is building up in the bees. The bee population has crested and peaked. And then as the bee population begins to diminish, the mite population continues to grow. And under that August line, that's where we think it crosses over, and Randy Oliver thinks that's the point of when a colony will crash. So if you can get the treatments on early as possible, and you know, if you caught a swarm, and let's just pretend you're not going to use it for any kind of honey production, you could really treat any time that the temperature is suitable for that kind of treatment. So earlier the better once the supers come off. I really like, it's a 50% formic acid flash treatment, but it can't be any warmer than 86 degrees or it burns out your queen. So I'll use this Apivar, which is the white strips. They are a little more expensive. I've tried oxalic acid and glycerin on shop towels, and Randy Oliver was working on this, probably 2 years ago. I could not get this to work. This was a different way of an extended oxalic acid release. So you could have emerging brood, and the oxalic acid and the glycerin would work on that brood, or work on the mites that were coming from the emerging brood. But every time I laid this on my brood boxes, it forced all the bees down. It smelled so bad. They didn't like it. And I don't know where Randy Oliver ended up going with this, but it didn't work for me and I gave up. And he, of course, in all of his articles, he said, this is experimental only. And I don't know what permission he had from whom to work on it, but it just didn't work out for me, so I give up. So August the 1st, I'm using Apivar, and then as the weather does cool down, I like to use the formic acid. But in between, I've got, this is the information on that flash treatment. And it needs more explanation than this, but in the early 2000s, from the West Virginia University, these two guys, Jim Amrine and Robert Knoll, started working with lemongrass oil and wintergreen oil and 50% liquid formic acid. And they had their own pads. They had the formic acid mixed up and they added it to these pads. And it was a fumigant, and it tended to dissipate after 24 hours, so they called it a flash treatment. And then there's follow-up research that was done by Dennis Van Ingelsdorp, Robin Underwood, and Diana Cox Foster. And if you know those names are pretty big, significant researchers, and they liked the results they got. And then it just kind of fell away out of favor, and nobody seemed to pursue it. But I like to use this in conjunction with a thing called grease patties. And this was back in the early 1980s, grease patties were used to mix up with terramycin. And you put them on in the fall. The terramycin had the extended release. The bees don't like the grease, and so they got greasy. The terramycin was distributed in this grease patty. And we think this is one of the reasons that terramycin became resistant, or rather, American foul brood became resistant to the terramycin. It's just because it got overused and was used for a long period of time. We use grease patties, which are nothing more than sugar and Crisco, for tracheal mites. And then we're finding our Varroa treatments have diminished the populations of That's the mite I just said, whatever it was. And isn't that just annoying when you got that on the tip of your tongue and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. Might be old age, Phil. I don't know. But these grease patties worked on those mites. And then the chemicals that we were using for the varroa mite also worked on the tracheal mites. There we go. And my brain spins around, and sometimes that word drops right into place. Most times not. So the tracheal mites. So it didn't, grease patties just kind of fell out of favor. But Jim Amrine and Robert Knoll used these grease patties as an extended way to distribute wintergreen oil. And their thoughts were, the mites don't like the wintergreen oil. As the bees get greasy and groom themselves, the wintergreen oil causes the mites to drop off. Now, where do they go? Well, they also like screen bottom boards. And again, this is all about the year 2000 through 2003. Several articles in the American Bee Journal published these results. So the ones I make up, again, start with 4 pounds of sugar, takes half a can of Crisco, and it's a 48-ounce canister, and so you just cut that in half or you can weigh it out. A cup of honey, 1/3 cup salt, which Jim Amrine and Robert Knoll says elevates the palatability, and so the bees are much more readily, they want chewed up faster. And then 3 tablespoons of wintergreen oil. And then just for kicks, I add 2 cups of AP23 protein supplement. Again, just to give them some extra nutrition. And of course, some people say, oh my gosh, this is in August, remember. Doesn't that cause some stimulation of egg laying? I don't know. I don't have anything to measure it against, and it may, but quite frankly, if I got eggs being laid in August, I think that's a good thing. If I have them being laid in September, I think that's a good thing too. Got young bees moving into the winter. Now, if the queen is laying through December and January, that might be another issue. But for the most part, I like young bees in my colonies going into the winter. So my preferred plan, I use Apivar in my hives when it's still hot, like in August. Follow up with these grease patties. And then in September, which is about right now when the weather has finally cooled down, I like this formic acid flash treatment. So those 3 things is the strong population of bees, get the mites under control, and then ample stores. And by mid-September, right about now, I'm switching over, because the nights are cool enough, to a 2-to-1 sugar. And hopefully, I don't like to mix up 2-to-1 because it takes some really, really hot water. It's more labor intensive. And hopefully I've got enough resources in there that I can just stop. It might be a time, if your hives are still light, to consider some solid feed. And there's these candy boards and all kinds of recipes on the internet. It's cooked fondant. Got to kick it up to like 240 degrees and you let it cool, and then you whip it. Put some vinegar or cream of tartar in there, and I tell you, it's a lot of work. Then the sugar bricks, basically it's just 10 pounds of sugar and a little bit of water, and you stir it up enough, and you stir it, it won't even be like the consistency to clump together. It just lays in there in your sugar board or in your mold, and then it gets hard, and it gets hard like a brick. Bees will tear that up. And sometimes I'll do this for lighter hives because I think it's just cheap insurance. And that's a candy board. That's one I cooked, and I just put it in the in an inner cover. The bees needed it, and if you could look at this, I can't find my pointer now. Oh no, I got a pointer here somewhere. That colony ate through that top super that was full of honey and started in on that candy board. And again, it's just cheap insurance. They prefer honey syrup that's been cured in the comb, but sometimes this is what you offer them. And lastly, I want to talk about this idea of insulating the hives. And if you were to ask me 3-4 years ago if I thought hives needed to be insulated, I'd say no, biggest waste of time. Now, when I kept bees in Minnesota, we would wrap them with this roofing tar or roofing paper or tar paper. It really didn't insulate them. Now, it blocked the wind if you had a rotten corner. But mostly what we did is wrapped them in this tar paper, and up at the top, you kind of folded the tops in like a Christmas present and put that lid on there. When the sun shines on it, and you got to think, man, that on one side of that hive, it must get really hot, while on the other side of the colony, it must be just below zero. It warms the hive enough that these bees can kind of move around a little bit, break cluster, and find a new area of honey. But in terms of being any kind of like insulation, no, it really doesn't work that way. Moisture is a big problem because the moisture condenses with the heat on one side and the cold on the other. We would, long about March, we'd take this tar paper off these hives in Minnesota, and we would find underneath the tar paper where all the moisture had condensed between the tar paper and the wood. And a lot of times we'd grown black mold in that early spring. And then as we took the tar paper off, it's hard to store. The sunlight took care of all the black mold that growing between the tar paper and the wood. But everyone says, well, insulation is really not needed in Missouri. And I think there's some truth to that. Because if you got a good population, if you got your mites under control and that nice population is healthy, and you've got ample stores, many beekeepers are very successful at keeping their hives alive with just those three things. That's the good population, the mite control, and ample stores. So a lot of people argue, you really don't need to. And I agree. And again, an opinion based on experience. Well, in 2018, I moved from Cape Girardeau up to Holden. And as I moved, I remembered a lot of different things here. That the cold doesn't kill the colonies, it's the moisture, implying the condensation. And if condensation is a problem in these little 3/4 inch pine boxes, then maybe the hive condensation is a problem when the hive is poorly insulated, and that 3/4 inch pine on the sides of this, in the top of the hive, really don't provide much insulation at all, and that's where the moisture collects. And I'm also reminded bees don't heat the cluster like we heat our homes. They just, that heat is condensed in there. But when I was president, there was a big windstorm that came through southern Iowa and killed a bunch of bees. They called it the wind chill. And a a lot of colonies died just from the cold air. So I thought, well, maybe that tar paper will help on that. Maybe there's some insulation that'll help on that. But again, come back to that conclusion. We don't need them in Missouri. However, this was my experience. I'll get to that in a minute. This picture, and this has been talked about for about 10 years, putting a piece of 1-inch foam above the inner cover, because we think most of the heat that's lost comes from the top. This is where that moisture is going to condense, and this just helps with that, the condensation. Of course, as it condenses, it gathers. When it warms up, it rains down on the bees and presents a problem. These are the back sides of the colonies. You can also see, if you look real carefully, there's screen bottom boards on all these colonies. And I like screen bottom boards, although I think I liked them a little more 10 years ago. Let me show you the front of the colony. I wish I had a pointer here, but just above the white box, the bottom side of that brown with the paint peeling on it inner cover is a little 3/4 inch by 3/8 inch air hole. And that's what I like to allow some of the moisture to leave the colony. The top brood box houses my feeder, and sometimes I use inverted jars, sometimes I use a 2-gallon bucket. I just leave it on there. When I fed them early in the spring, I'd take that top box off. It's called the EKE, E-K-E. And as I would take that back to my shop, well, then I'd have to store it somewhere. Then in the fall, I'd have to take it back out again. So I just leave it on now. But this is my new place in Holden. I hope all those trees impress you about how much wind is not blocked at my house. Had my bees out in this field, and I was concerned about, the wind never laid down. It just seemed like it was windy every day. I was hauling hives from Cape Girardeau. bringing some up, but I didn't have time to take care of them. I didn't have time to take care of the hives down in Cape Girardeau. So this hauling, the hives got neglected. I was negligent, and I was feeling a little desperate about how can I get these light hives to survive. And that's where I picked up this idea. Maybe some insulation would help. And if nothing else, just to block the wind. So I started using this 2-inch foam board. I had to put furring strips on the side so I could tie the panels up there. Underneath this telescoping cover is an empty super. That empty super sits on the blue 1-inch foam board above the inner cover. But I had something to lift up that the hive bodies to accommodate the telescoping cover. So I did this more out of desperation. But here's what was kind of interesting. Of the lighter hives I insulated, the majority of them survived. I was very surprised. I was extremely thankful. Just surprised beyond normal, because I really expected those hives to die. They were so light, they were neglected. A lot of them didn't get treatment and transition. But what also surprised me is up on top of this hill, some of the stronger colonies without insulation, who should have made it, because in Missouri, a strong population of bees, get your mite treatment under control, and they're well fed, they should survive. Well, some of those died unexpectedly, and that surprised me too. So I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I insulate those? Well, we say in Missouri, you don't need to insulate them. Now, with these two observations, I also have to make this concession. There's a lot of variables that go into winter survival. It may be some of the treatments didn't work. I didn't get them on early enough. It may have been the stress moving them up. There's just a lot of things I did not do right in 2018. But with the surviving hives, I decided, in 2019, I'm going to insulate every hive just to see what my experience is. So here's last winter. And yeah, we had more of a winter than previous years. So I got all my colonies insulated. Instead of tying them with twine, I was starting to use these ratchet straps. And again, those hives that one hive kind of in the middle that didn't get insulated, that was a dead out from the summer, and I just left it there because, quite frankly, that's good storage for them. And so the protocol that I was working with last fall was the lighter hives, I'm giving them a candy board. The heavy hives, now they don't really need an extra candy board. All hives on the top of the inner cover or the candy board got a 1-inch blue foam board that goes on the top. And then I put an empty super on there so I can bring up the sides of the 2-inch pink board to cover where that blue board is. So basically you got like a whole covering around it. And the first question I get is, well, what about an upper entrance? What about ventilation? Well, I closed off the screen bottom boards. I didn't put any upper entrances. They're all covered with the insulation. The blue board, the pink board going up. I didn't put an entrance reducer in there, but I did put 1/2-inch wire mesh as a mouse guard. And I believe there's enough ventilation just from that 3/4-inch non-reduced entrance. And first question people say is, oh my gosh, well, what kind of results did you get? Well, I was very pleased. Of the 80 hives I brought into the winter, last year I lost 8. And quite frankly, I was so overjoyed at only losing 8, I didn't really pay much attention to see why they died. But the cost to insulate them was about $16 to $20 per colony. Out of 3 4x8 sheets of that 2-inch foam insulation, you can get around, with 2 sheets, you can insulate 3 colonies. And there's a kind of a funny way they got to be cut to make all those measurements work. And let's see, I'm going to pull that off. And I am done with that part of the program. Let's see if there's any questions that people have.
Grant, one thing that I'll say, when you presented that, what I noticed just on technology level with Zoom, when you went into presentation mode, it kicked my computer into full screen mode, so I couldn't see the chat anymore. Now that
Oh,
now that you've gone out of there, I can see the chat again. So again, folks, if you are now seeing what I'm seeing, you can go down to that chat box at the bottom of your screen and click on there, and it should open up a chat to the right, and you can type any questions that you have for Grant. Yeah, there's been some public chat that's gone on up till now.
there you go. No, the question there is, you mentioned mold when insulating before. That was with that tar paper. And I think because it got so hot and drew the moisture from the inside between the hive and the paper out, that's where that mold occurred. So with these 2-inch pink foam board, no, there is no mold, and I can't really tell if there was any condensation on the inside. I can lift up the blue board, lift off the candy if it's a candy, or lift off the inner cover. It doesn't seem to be any kind of condensation underneath the inner cover. As far as the sides are, no, there's just no mold at all. What type of feeder do you use when you're feeding the 2-to-1? I use inverted jars. When I'm feeding the 2-to-1, it's now, I mean, the only time I feed 2-to-1 is when it starts getting cold. I like feeding 1-to-1 because it's easy to mix. A lot of times I just use an inverted half-gallon ball canning jar. Sometimes I've used a bucket sitting in a pie plate, but if you get any kind of, and it's a 2-gallon, sometimes that syrup likes to go bad and it ferments and then bubbles out and gets everything wet. So I really like half-gallon ball jars with little nail holes punched in the lid, inverted over the inner cover, because it puts them on the inner cover. It puts it right where the bees are at. And of course, you got to feed before you put the candy board on. So from Josh M. So do you think we should use insulation? That's a funny question, because my first response to you would be no. I'm not telling everybody this is the best thing in the world. I'm not telling you this is how you have to do it. What I'm saying is I had a really good experience with it. I just share that good experience. I just leave it up to you. So do I think you should? Man, it's up to you. And you got to find that best way. What I do find interesting, and this was at the spring conference we had here just before we shut everything down with the virus and the pandemic. I was talking to some beginners about this insulation, and there are a lot of beginner beekeepers who insulated their colonies in some way or fashion. When I asked, that's great, now why did you do it? They really didn't have an answer. They didn't have an answer that was based on honeybee biology or any kind of experience. What they did was they had this guilt, oh my gosh, it's really cold and I really care about my bees. And so I want to protect them some way. Some people did wrap tar paper. Some people had some kind of insulation or cardboard. And of course, they sell these things called bee cozies that are insulation in a giant trash bag. And they went out, and of course, some people try and break the wind with straw bales or big sheets of plywood or snow fence. So to get back to the question, do I think you should use insulation? No. Well, yes. Not really. Well, you could, but you don't have to. So there, I just answered your question. I do know this. I'm going to insulate all my colonies again this year. That's what I'm going to do. Now, if there's some way I can help you with that knowledge or that application, I'm glad to do it. But I'm not going to sit back and say, here's what you got to do, because only you can decide what you're going to do. Now, and there's a funny question too about beekeepers. Sometimes when somebody comes up to me, they say, well, if I was you, And that's where I stop them and I say, well, but you're not. You're not me. But if you were, you would do it my way, wouldn't you? And they kind of laugh and they go, well, no, I just had an idea about what I might do if I was you. And well, anyhow, that just doesn't seem to work very good. So again, so do you think we should use insulation? That's your call. Again, I like it. Much difference between the winters between southeast Missouri and northwest Missouri? Yes. Particularly in the spring, and when I'm on Facebook and I'm looking at the Missouri beekeepers and I see my old buddies down there in Cape Girardeau, the things that they're doing, I feel like I've missed the boat. I feel like I'm about 2 weeks behind schedule. It's still cold up here. They've got things in bloom, and I look out my window and I go, why don't I have that in bloom? Yeah, I'm still trying to adapt to this climate. And let's see. To clarify, the blue foam board goes between the top hive body and the inner cover. That's correct. Then an empty super above. That is correct. And that's because I want the sides to go up above the inner cover. So I put the foam board above that. And then somewhere I've got to put this telescoping cover over that top super. And that top empty super just allows for another space for me to fit the telescoping cover on. And even if I went to migratory covers, I'd have to do that. I probably, if I really felt like it, I could just use a normal 16¼ by 20 inch with no telescoping qualities. I could just use that, but then I think I'd drip some water in there. So do you know much about the Apame plastic hives? Nope, I don't. I've seen them. I just don't have any experience. So if I were to render an opinion, and opinions are based on experience, I'd give you the most ignorant opinion in the world. I've seen them. Actually, what I'm trying to do is use up the equipment I've got. And I've been winnowing a lot of my equipment, but I've got all these Langstroth wood colonies. If I didn't have them, I might switch to something else, but right now I'm going to go with what I know. Now, Bob says, I agree with the 2-inch insulation. I don't insulate all of them, but I do insulate the hives that have little or no wind protection. Great presentation. Thank you. Well, Bob, we're in agreement on that. Now, for $16 to $20 per colony, I'm just thinking maybe I can save 1 or 2 strong colonies, but I think you're right. It's the colonies that are weak, they're vulnerable. And when I was in the process of moving up here, it's like I inflicted my own negligence on these colonies just because we're trying to tie up loose ends in Jackson, we're trying to move into the new house in Holden. We're trying to get the house in Jackson ready to sell. We're trying to move our stuff into the house in Holden. We're trying to finish out the farmers markets and trying to get moved up to Holden. I'll tell you straight up, it was very, very stressful. And looking back, I think if I had all the money in the world to do this, I would give away everything in Cape County. Just share it with all my buddies. And then I would buy brand new and start fresh. And that's the way I built my honey hobby up in Jackson. I started small, and along the way, growing by little steps, I had a place for things. I knew where stuff was at. And now I've moved all this equipment, all this detritus, all these bees, shoehorned them into a piece of property where I could now work out of. There's a shop up here, but I just moved everything in there, and I'm trying to get the shop adapted to my beekeeping practices. I got boxes, I got totes. I can't find anything. It's in there. So if I was going to move again, I think I'm just going to give everything away, start fresh, build small, start small, build up, and that way I know where everything's at. And it looks like we are out of questions. Somebody up the line said they went to church. Yeah, they go to church at Abundant Life. That, where the Lee's Summit Farmers Market went to, is their parking lot is just absolutely ideal. Lots of space, less ways for us to social distance. Customers they don't have to feel like they're going down a row. They can meander all around. Brian says, let me know when you move next time. I'm serious about this. Moving was so stressful, in part because I had all this junk, and a lot of this junk, I kept saying, this winter, I'm going to fix that. Well, you never have time for that. I took the best of the best, or maybe the best of the used stuff. There was a bunch of stuff. I called some buddies and I said, just come on over. I really need this place cleaned up. Take what you want, and I'm just going to burn all the rest. And when I got down to that burning, it was broken boxes. It was rotten pallets. It was frames that had been warped. It was just all this stuff you collect, and you just never find time to fix it. So Brian and I will keep you in mind. And one of these days, because I've still got a lot of extra stuff that I don't even know why I brought it. One of these days, I'm just going to have to figure out, what am I really going to use? I need more room in that shop, and yep, give it away. Because if I just put like $5 on a box, somebody's going to come along and say, $5, really? Seriously, $5? I'll give you 2. Well, then I'm insulted. But if I give it away, there's nothing to insult. And I feel good giving that stuff away. So Jenna says, thanks, Grant, great information. I may have to think my opinion on a few things. And yeah, and again, I'm not, oh, Brian, thanks, you put your phone number. Hey, I'm serious about that. When I took off, we had some hail damage here back in May, I think it was. I got a new tin roof on my shop. The contractor was going to charge me $400 for a dumpster. And I said, really? What if I find somebody who wants all my used tin and we cancel the dumpster? Well, I advertised on Missouri Beekeepers, and I had some fella come out. He had a use for that tin, brought a gigantic trailer, took all the tin and even the leftover stuff that the contractor didn't use. And I was happy to give it away. He offered to pay me. I said, no, I just want it gone. He came, picked it up. So Brian, I will keep your phone number, because one of these days, I just need to downsize a little bit.
Well, thank you, Grant, for that presentation. That was
You're welcome.
wonderful. Do you have any more private questions that were sent to you? Because we don't get to see every question sent to you, because some of the questions are sent privately. Do you have any more questions?
That was, the private ones were just, now I get how this works.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, I'm sorry I read your question. Brian, good thing I didn't give your phone number out.
Well, I'm sure that if everybody was unmuted, you get a big round of applause. That was a fantastic presentation, Grant.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
By the way, are you going to send me a mileage check?
I will pay you every penny out of my personal account. Yes.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Thank you, Grant. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Phil.
Well, everybody, like I said, that's it for our presentation today from Grant. We'll have this up on YouTube here in the next couple of weeks. And just want to thank everybody for attending, and stay safe out there. And Grant, it's great to see you. Great presentation, and I hope everybody takes care.
Thanks. Well, just one other point. If you go to slideshare.net, it's posted today.
Okay.
So if you want those recipes, like for that grease patty that I like, and of course, this is stuff I'm kind of reviving from 20 years ago, but I like those grease patties, and I got out of the habit of using them. But all that information is up on SlideShare, slideshare.net. Just search for Midwestern, search for my name, and it should be popping up. But
awesome.
Eric, you're very, very welcome. Glad to be a part of it.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, everybody, for being with us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weather. Take care, folks.